Section 90 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mukund Manikarnike, Tempe, Arizona. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4, by Henry Charles LEA, Book 9, Chapter 2, Conclusion, Retrospect, Part 6. Under such influences, the toleration which had been so marked a feature of the medieval period gradually gave place to a fanaticism finding its expression in the Inquisition, and inflamed into greater fierceness by the existence and reaction of that institution. There can be no question as to the sincere devoutness of Charles V, according to the unanimous testimony of the Venetian envoys, who describe his punctual discharge of all religious observances and who state the surest avenue to his favor was the manifestation of earnest zeal for religion. Shortly before his death, he expressed deep regret that he had not executed Luther at Worms, in spite of his pledged safe conduct, for he ought to have forfeited his word in order to avenge the offense to God. In his will, executed in 1554 at Brussels, he charged Philip II in the most earnest manner to favor in all ways the Inquisition, because of the many and great offences to God which it prevents or punishes, and, in the codicil of September 9, 1558, dictated on his deathbed, his first thought is to repeat the injunction and to urge his son, by the obedience due to a father, to prosecute heresy rigorously, unsparingly, and relentlessly. Philip II needed no such exhortations. From his earliest youth he had breathed an atmosphere surcharged by the conflict with heresy. He had been taught that a sovereign's highest duty to God and man was to enforce unity of faith, not only as a paramount religious obligation, but because it was an axiom of the statesmanship of the time that in no other way could the peace of a kingdom be preserved. There is no reason to doubt his perfect sincerity when in 1568 the Archduke Charles came to Spain as the representative of the German princes to urge an accommodation with the Netherlands, and Philip, besides his formal reply, gave the Archduke secret instructions to tell the Emperor that no human influence or considerations of state, or all that the whole world could say or do, would make him vary a hair's breadth from the course which he had adopted and intended to pursue in this matter of religion throughout all his dominions, that he would listen to no advice with regard to it and would take ill any that might be offered. At the same time he wrote to Chantenay, his ambassador at Vienna, that what he was doing in the Netherlands was for their advantage and the preservation of the Catholic faith, and that he would make no change in his policy if it involved risking all his possessions and if the whole world would fall upon his head. So in 1574 the instructions to the commissioners sent to Breda to confer with the deputies of William the Silent were to declare emphatically that he would suffer no one to live under his throne was not completely a Catholic. Philip was merely translating into practice the teachings of the Church, and won its unstinted admiration. Cardinal Pallavicini contrasts the vacillating persecution in France with his sanguinary rigor, which was not only grateful to heaven but propitious to his kingdom, thus saved by salutary bloodletting. It was natural that Philip in his will, executed March 7, 1594, should reiterate to his son and successor the injunctions which he had received from his father. The Inquisition was to be with the object of special favor, even greater than in the past, for the times were perilous and full of so many errors in faith. Philip III had not energy enough to be an active persecutor, and if, under the guidance of Lerma, he expelled the Moriscos, under the same tutelage he made peace with England in 1605 and a truce with Holland in 1609, to the disgust of the pious who could not understand any dealings with heretics. Yet he was a most religious prince who spent hours every day in his devotions and in examining his conscience, and who set a shining example by the frequency with which he sought confession and communion. It was a matter of course that he should, in his will, leave to his successor the customary instructions to foster the Inquisition. As to Philip IV, we have seen abundant instances of his subservience to it during his half-century of reign, and of his readiness to subordinate to it all other interests. He showed his consistency in this when, at the dictation of the Suprema, he incurred a war with England through his refusal to sign a treaty forbidding the persecution of Englishmen in Spain on account of their religion, and in his will, executed in 1665, he said the customary injunctions on his successor to aid and favor the Inquisition, adding an exhortation to honor and defend the clergy in all their exemptions and immunities, and earnestly to labor for the reformation of religious orders. Carlos II was a non-entity who need not be considered, and with the Bourbons we enter on the dawn of a new era in which fanaticism no longer dominates the policy of the state. It is true that Philip V, when abdicating in 1724, enjoined on his son Louis the preservation of the faith through the instrumentality of the Inquisition as fervently as any of his predecessors, and that during the first third of the century there was a fierce recrudescence of inquisitorial activity, but we have seen how the spirit of the age gradually made itself felt, and although the duty of exterminating heresy was still admitted in theory, in practice its enforcement was greatly mitigated. It is difficult for us in the indifferentism of the 20th century to realize or to understand the violence of the passions excited by the questions of faith, dissociated from all temporal interests and their influence on a people so emotional as the Spaniards, and so apt, as they tell us themselves, to be swayed by imagination rather than by reason. We have seen the whole kingdom of Portugal thrown into excitement by the theft of a pyx with a consecrated host, and that only the opportune discovery of the culprit saved all the New Christians from expulsion. It might seem to us a very trivial affair that on the eve of Good Friday, 1640, there was posted in the chapter house of Granada a placard ridiculing the Christian religion, praising the Mosaic law, and blaspheming the purity of the Virgin, but it produced the greatest excitement throughout Spain. Special services were held in all the churches to appease the insulted deity and to discover the malefactor. He was detected in the person of a hermit of the Santa Imagen del Triunfo, who was arrested, and Inquisitor Rodezno deemed it advisable to break the inviolable secrecy of the Inquisition in order to calm the public agitation by letting the people know that the culprit had been discovered and convicted. Learned doctors improved the occasion by printing dissertations in which it was proved that he must be burnt alive if no death more atrocious could be invented to suit the crime. The fanatical hatred of heresy per se, thus sedulously inculcated and ingrained in the moral fiber of every Spaniard, is seen in the statutes of limpieza, which close the avenues to distinction to the descendants of conversos and of those who had been penanced by the Inquisition, so that even arrest and imprisonment for a trivial offense inflicted, according to popular prejudice, an indelible stigma on a family. We have seen to what insane extent this was carried and what evil it wrought in the social organization, but more prolific in evil was the habit of thought by which it was engendered and which it intensified. Yet practically the religion which was so sensitive to purity of faith was of a very superficial character. External observances were strictly enforced, and the Inquisition was ever on the watch to punish any irreverence in act or word. Yet Alfonso de Castro tells us that in the mountainous provinces such as Asturias, Galicia, and elsewhere, the word of God was so rarely preached to the people that they observed many pagan rites and many superstitions. To labor on Sunday or feast day was a serious offense involving suspicion of heresy, yet Carranza says that more offenses against God were committed on Sundays than in the all-week days combined. Those who went to Mass mostly spent the time in business or in talking or sleeping. Those who did not go gratified their vanity or their appetites. The ancient Jews used to say that on their feast days the demons left the cities for refuge in the mountain caves. But now it would seem that on weekdays the demons avoided the people who were busy with their labors, and on feast days came trooping joyfully from the deserts, for then they find the doors open to all kinds of vices. Paulo Tiepolo in 1563 observes that in all external signs of religion the Spaniards are exceedingly devout, but he doubts whether the interior corresponds. The clergy live as they choose without any one reprehending them, and he is scandalized by the buffooneries and burlesques performed in the churches on feast days. The churches, in fact, seem to have been places for everything save devotion. Apelaqueta describes the profane observances during divine service, the inattention of the priests, the processions of masks and demons, the banquets and feastings, and other disgraceful profanations, so that there are few of the faithful who do not sin in church, and few who do not utter idle, vain, foul, evil, or profane words. In hot weather, the coolness of the churches made them favorite lounging places for both sexes, including monks and nuns, and much that was indecent occurred. They were moreover places for the transaction of business, and more bargaining took place here than in the markets. This was not a mere passing custom. A century later, Francisco Santos pictures for us a church crowded with so-called worshippers, where the services could scarce be heard for the noise, beggars crying for alms and wrangling among themselves, two men quarreling fiercely and on the point of drawing their swords, a group of young gallants chattering and maltreating a poor man who had chanced to touch them in passing, people leaving one mass that had commenced to follow a priest who had the reputation of greater dispatch in his sacred functions. In a chapel, a bevy of fair ladies drinking chocolate, discussing fashions, and waited on by their admirers. All is worldly, and the religious observance is the merest pretext. This irreverence was shared by the priests. A brief of Urban VIII, January 30, 1642, recites complaints from the dean and chapter of Seville concerning the use of tobacco in the churches, both in smoking and snuffing, even by priests while celebrating Mass, and of their profanation of the sacred cloths by using them and staining them with tobacco. Therefore he decrees excommunication lata sententia for the use of the weed within the sacred precincts. It is evident that the Inquisition, while enforcing conformity as to dogma and outward observance, failed to inspire genuine respect for religion. End of section 90. Recording by Mukund Manikarnike, Tempe, Arizona, mmanikar.com.